How are you? What do you want? Good afternoon. Welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session of October 13, 2020. This meeting is called to order. We'll do a attendance roll call. I know one of our council members is here, but I think he just stepped out. Councilmember Aldama, are you present? I know, he's here somewhere, but Councilmember Clark? Here. Councilmember Hugh? Councilmember Tomachoff?
Here.
Councilmember Turner?
Here.
Vice Mayor?
Present.
Okay, and I'm present. We'll call Councilmember Aldama one more time. Okay, when he comes in, if you'd take note, I'd appreciate it. Could you go ahead and introduce item number 1? We'll get started.
Item 1, council item of special interest, property tax levy financial policy.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. The first item is a council item of special interest on the debt management financial policy of the city. Before I start, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Mr. Kurt Freund. He's the city's financial advisor, and he's also a managing director at RBC Capital Markets. In this presentation, we'll cover secondary property tax, potential revisions to the city's debt management policy, and at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up for council feedback, and we're also looking for council consensus on the proposed policy. And lastly, we'll go over next steps. Secondary property tax is governed by Arizona revised statute on county and other municipal indebtedness. The revenues collected from secondary property tax can only be used to pay general obligation or GO debt. The state statute requires cities to levy sufficient taxes to pay debt service on existing and future GO debt. The council's policy is to maintain a flat levy and has done so for the last 7 consecutive fiscal years. A flat levy means the amount of revenue generated by the tax stays about the same every year and only grows by the value of new construction within the city. In this slide, you see the last 7 years of history of Glendale's secondary property tax levy. And as you can see, the amount collected for all properties remains about the same every year, and the slight increase you're seeing is due to growth from new properties being added. Each individual's property taxes may change slightly up or down as the value of the property fluctuates. But under this flat levy policy, the total amount of revenue the city receives from secondary property taxes only increases by the amount of tax on new property being added. The city's current debt management policy states general obligation debt is supported by secondary property tax revenues. The secondary property tax revenues assessed are based upon the ability to finance the city's debt service obligations, and the rate is dependent upon the revenue requirements and the assessed valuation of taxable property. At a minimum, the general obligation debt service fund balance will be at least 10% of the next fiscal year's property tax supported by debt service. The next slide is on the proposed revisions to the debt management policy, and I will turn it over to Mr. Freund. Before I do that, I also wanted to let council know that the city's bond attorney has also reviewed and approved the proposed revisions to the debt management policy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Freund.
bonds, but you pay the debt service not from a property tax, but you pay it from the enterprise fund, the landfill enterprise fund. So we wanted to call that out so you can see some changes relative to that. And then the second is just to clarify the city's policy relative to the amount of fund balance that you seek to maintain in the general obligation debt service fund. And it's an amount, previously it had been an amount of at least 10%. The legislature changed the law a couple years back to limit it to no more than 10%. So we've modified this language to indicate that the goal is to shoot for a fund balance of approximately 10%, but not in excess of 10%, so you're consistent with the statutes. That fund balance is important to you because you don't know for certain what your level of delinquencies is going to be in any given year, so you want to have a little bit of cushion with your property taxes in the event delinquencies come in higher or some other glitch occurs, that you have sufficient monies to pay the debt service on the bonds and don't actually have a default for really a technical reason. The second change then is in the new paragraph at the bottom, and it really consists of two elements. The first is really what we're talking about here is that the City Council would not authorize the issuance of bonds for non-enterprise purposes that would cause an increase in the levy beyond what it currently is, plus new growth not to exceed 2% a year. New growth is new property coming onto the tax rolls, as I think you all know. And so the goal is to, when you go to authorize the issuance of bonds, make sure that you meet that provision, and that will ensure that your levy doesn't exceed what you want it to exceed, which is a flat levy plus growth. The second element that we added in there is the last sentence, which is that this policy you're going to adopt affects the issuance of bonds by the city. So it'll serve as a governor to the amount of debt you issue to keep the debt service in line with the levy and no growth in the levy, the existing levy. But we don't want it to foul up the statutory provisions that secure general obligation bonds. And there's a provision in the statutes in ARS 35-458 that speaks to general obligation bonds being secured by an unlimited tax at either an amount or a rate. Well, we don't want to signal to investors that that's no longer the case. We're going to govern the flat levy issue by how much you issue, not by trying to thwart what the statute says. If you did that, then you wouldn't really be able to issue GO bonds to investors because they'd go, well, wait a second, we don't know if we're going to get paid. And so that's what that provision is in the language. Hopefully that's clear, but I'd be happy to answer any questions, obviously, on the new policy. Questions from the council? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So could you go into a little bit more in-depth explanation specifically what that means of levying sufficient ad valorem taxes with respect to its outstanding GO bonds? I understand that it's basically required by state statute, but what exactly does that mean?
So general obligation bonds are what are called full faith and credit bonds. They're secured by an unlimited property tax. So they're secured by the general property tax credit of the city. And by law, the property tax that can be levied is not limited by rate or amount. And so what that means is, take an extreme example. Let's say I'm a mining community in Arizona, and the mine closes and everybody moves out of town, and my property values fall a whole bunch. I got to jack my property tax rate up to pay the GO bonds. In your case, you have this overriding policy, though, that says, hey, we're going to have a flat levy plus whatever the new growth component is, limited to no more than 2% a year. So you're going to, when you issue bonds, you're going to look at your levy, and you're going to say, my levy is $100. I'm going to assume that it's $100 going forward throughout the life of the bonds, plus a little bit for growth, not more than 2%. And I'm going to issue bonds such that the debt service is no more than that $100 per year growing by that little new growth amount. So that's why I say you're going to govern it at that point. If you can't meet that, you won't issue the bonds, so that you'll never run into a situation where the provisions of that statute actually kick in because you're set at a flat levy. Does that that help make
Yeah,
sense?
that does, thank you.
But that allows us also to say to bondholders, we wouldn't want to say to bondholders, hey, these bonds are secured by a limited tax, because then they wouldn't be GO bonds anymore.
And I'd like to clarify that this is a policy. If this council chooses, that doesn't mean 3 years from now, a different council couldn't turn around and change this and do something differently.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
Milner?
Yes, just had one question regarding the 2%. And I don't know what it would take to get to 2%, but why are we limiting, if we have new growth, why would we limit it to 2%? Let's say we had a 3% in new property that it was added to the tax rolls. Why would we then limit that ability to 2%? Why wouldn't we just leave it at plus growth?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. We could just say plus growth, but if the growth is less than what we had estimated in our financial model, the actual growth, then it essentially corrects itself the next time we looked at our financial model, because the actual growth is built in once we know what that is for that fiscal year. We're updating the financial model every year, and we anticipate, based on the actual levy for fiscal year 21, for example, if the growth is more, so the actual levy will be higher. And then for the following year, when we look at our financial model, then we could potentially issue more debt because the growth actually came in higher than the 2%, for example.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
I want to follow up on Vice Mayor's question because I'm not sure you really answered it. I like the idea of just putting in the word growth rather than limiting it to 2%. I know that's more comfortable for people who deal with statistics and money all the time, but I agree with you. Why should we limit it to 2%? We have some very big projects coming online in the next couple of years that I think will push our growth way beyond 2%. So I hate to see us limit ourselves.
I think she actually did answer the question, but basically, if I understood your answer, it was the following year you would make it up because you just take on more because you realized that extra growth that you had. So you're not losing it.
Mayor, if I may?
Go ahead.
But if you're limited to 2% every year, how could you make up, if it's more than 2% the following year, how do you
Growth.
exceed the 2%?
Growth plus 2%. You make up your growth, and then you add the 2%.
But it doesn't say
It
that.
doesn't say that.
So, Mr.
Says it's
Mayor,
limits.
Am I wrong?
no, you're not wrong, but maybe an example will help. It's today, I'm going to go issue bonds. Again, let's say my levy's $100, just to make it easy. So when we look to do that bond issue, we have to project something for new growth today, right? So we'll say, let's project something conservative because this is an important policy matter for the council. We don't want to project anything more than 2%, really to be more on the conservative side. So right now we say, okay, well, the growth we'll assume is 2%, let's say. So that means we'll run out a schedule that says the levy in year 1 is 100, in year 2 it's 102, and each year it'll grow by 2%. We'll look at a bond issue then that only allows the debt service for the new bonds plus the existing bonds to meet that requirement. Let's say at the end of year 1, the growth was 5%, and in year 2, we go to issue a bond issue. Well, we're going to start in year 2 with a levy amount of 105 because it grew 5%. That's what the mayor is referencing. So in year 2, we're going to say, okay, now we're going to run a schedule that says we're at a 105 levy. We picked up the full 5% growth in that year, and we're only going to allow that to grow for assumption purposes by up to 2% a year for the second bond issue that we do. And so that's how you catch up in terms of the growth, if that makes sense to everybody.
You're not losing it.
That help? Or did that make your heads hurt more?
Mayor?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You're always lagging by 1 year, and you're just relying on assumptions rather than looking at what the actual projection is. It's less work, too, right?
Well, you sort of have to look at the projections because you're doing it today, and I don't know what growth is going to be in the future. And so if, let's say I assume that the growth is, 5% and it only ends up being 2%, then the flat levy concept for existing properties doesn't work. So I have to, when you're doing this, you have to make an assumption on a conservative basis at the time you issue, but you catch up the following year or year after or each year you'll catch up. Otherwise, your flat levy concept can't be kept, right? Because if you assume too high and it doesn't actually happen on new growth.
I understand what you're saying, and I think I will direct this to Ms. Camacho. You said you would have no problem with just using growth rather than stipulating 2% growth. Is that still your sentiment, that you wouldn't have an issue if we just, and an amount each per year for new growth without saying it's 2% or 5% or 0%?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, yes, that is correct. If it says plus an amount for growth, that would be sufficient, and the piece that Mr. Freund talked about could be an internal process when we look at our financial model for issuing general obligation bonds.
And then I would be more comfortable in mirroring the vice mayor's sentiment and just keep the verbiage that allows for new growth without stating an actual percentage on an annual basis.
Thank you, Mayor. Were you finished? I just want to make sure I wasn't interrupted. Okay. But you would still have to use the 2% when you're forecasting. I mean, that would, but it would just be an internal process and not part of the policy. And I think I'd be more comfortable that we understood what they were using for. You still have to forecast. You can't just go on the current year's levy. Is that right?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachev, for forecasting, we could use the average growth for the last 10 years, that's what we've done. So if the average is 1%, for the financial model and forecasting the growth, it would be an average of 1%. And like Mr. Freund said, we would take a conservative approach, ensuring that the flat levy policy we meet the intent of the policy.
Mayor, I mean, I'm comfortable with the 2% because you're making up, when you're looking at the current year, you know what the levy is, so you can make up the ground. If it was 5% and you forecast 2, your forecast is you're including the current year's levy, and then you're forecasting 2% growth. So I'm okay with doing it that way because we're going to get it's going to be built in. It's going to accumulate as we grow. So I'm okay with it the way it is, but I did want to, I had another thing that I wanted to add, is what the mayor said is, obviously we can't predict what any future council is going to do, but the idea behind this is to provide some assurance to the residents of what our intention is to do, and that this would not be able to be changed without some sort of public process, this policy, right? And so that at least that it protects the residents in that way, that if there was to be a change in this policy, it would have to be noticed and done in public, just like we're doing now.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, it's about as clear as mud for me, and I think that it really would be best to make it as clear as possible. For the public and for future councils, that they shouldn't have to come back and watch us stumble through it here in this workshop to figure out what it was we were trying to decide. The forecasting is the council's, with staff, you decide how much are you going to forecast growth for the future. But this language to me sounds like when it comes time to do the levy, you could never have growth more than 2%. And even if you had 3 years in a row where growth was 5%, this still sounds to me like you're limited to 2%. Now, so I would be in favor of just deleting the phrase of up to 2% per year, and that would leave, it would be the amount of the current year's tax levy plus an amount for new growth, i.e. new property added to the rolls. So we've defined what growth is, and everybody understands that as the city grows with new property, then we can have a growth in our indebtedness. That to me is more clear, and it still doesn't. It's just more clear and doesn't subvert any of the things that we have the power to do anyway. Stormy?
Thank you, Mayor. I feel like it's pretty clear because if you have growth 3 years in a row, then the growth for 2020 is going to be included in the levy in the next tax levy. The growth, it's included. Every year, it's included in the levy based on the amount of property we're taxing. So, in my mind, I feel like it's clear, and this was what the bond attorneys approved as well. So, I think anything that we change would probably have to go back and be approved. I would think.
Mayor?
I think the thing everybody keeps forgetting is it's an estimate of what we think's going to happen. And so we're already in arrears when we start. I mean, we're anticipating what we think's going to happen. And if they anticipate it properly, do it conservatively with 2% or less, if we exceed that, the next year your properties are worth more money, so you make up there, and you can still add that 2% on top of it again. You're not behind. You're not
Mayor?
behind.
I understand what you're saying and the concept, but my problem is that it's always lagging. Rather than looking at the situation as it exists that fiscal year, you're always playing catch-up, if in fact the growth is greater than 2%. It doesn't reflect the fiscal reality of the situation of the year in which we are establishing the budget or deciding which projects get done or not. That's why I would prefer not to have a specific number in there on an annual basis, because really what staff should be doing is looking at what the growth is for that year that we're dealing with, instead of waiting until it all occurs and then tacking it on the following year.
But Councilmember Clark, our taxes are in arrears already.
I know that, but
We're already doing that. So, but this policy isn't going to change that. It's not going to change that at all.
I agree. The policy is just for clarification. And I have no problem with stating a policy that is clear for the public. My only problem has been to peg it at a certain number for growth.
Mr. Mayor, just not further complicated by any means. Just two things I'd say. One, keep in mind this policy is not a levy limit. It's a debt issuance limit, so it doesn't affect the levy at all. That's a different matter, just so people know. Second thing I'd say, from my perspective as someone, listening to you all, I think if you drop the 2%, it's fine. Your staff is going to come to you. Here's the takeaway from your guys' standpoint. If you assume a growth, and you must make an assumption, right? If you assume a growth and you assume too high, then you will not have a flat levy for existing properties if the growth comes in lower than you assume. So if you really want a flat levy for existing property, you'll want to be more conservative on your growth assumptions. You can take the 2% out. It's just meant to be a more conservative limit, Mr. Mayor, and it won't do any harm to this, and your staff will come to you when you issue GO bonds and say, hey, we're assuming 2% growth based on the last 10 years or a 1% growth. If you want a flat levy, you will want to make sure that they're being conservative enough, because if they aren't, there's nothing you can do at that point. The levy must go up. So just so people understand it.
Yeah. Ms. Camacho, since you've been here, has there ever been a time where we've exceeded that 2%?
Mayor, members of the council, no, not based on when we looked at the last 10-year history, it's about 1% in growth.
Okay, and my concern, if we have no limit, then obviously, what if a different council comes in and says, well, this year, let's go ahead and bump it up 5%, and then you miss that mark and you don't have the business that you're expecting? We got problems. That's my concern.
Mayor.
Now
I'm
you're on.
on now, there. Same thing can be said if you leave 2% in there. A future council can bump the 2% up to 5%. That's irrelevant. I just am uncomfortable pegging it at a certain number that I will tell you will never change in our lifetimes. Once it's in there like gospel. And I think a more realistic approach is to look at what we project for that current year and have staff do the comparative work that needs to be done to give us the most current assessment possible.
Mr. Miller, do you have anything else?
Yes, based on everything that I've heard so far, I believe it wouldn't matter whether we leave it in or take it out. But I think if we remove it and it is easier for the public to understand, then I think we should remove it, the 2%, and just leave it at the growth. And we've been told that that's not going to matter in the way it's administered. So I would say if that is the main concern, let's just remove it, and then we move forward with this.
Anything else? Anybody? No?
Mayor.
Well, we have to come to some sort of a consensus. I think it's important to state that our intention is to be conservative, and I feel like that's what the 2% says, is that we're being conservative, and I'm fine with the way it is. I believe it says what we want to say. We have to project the growth. I'd rather put it in here than leave it up to staff on a year-to-year basis, and I'm more comfortable doing it that way. Otherwise, we don't know if they can use any formula that they want. So, nothing against staff, but if you're really wanting to lock us in a conservative approach, isn't this the best way to do it?
Let me ask one other question, because we're going to beat this thing to death. What do other cities, similar cities, what typically would their policy be in something like this? Do you know?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I don't know of any other city that has as innovative a thought process on this issue as Glendale does, so I don't know anybody else that does this type of policy limitation, so I couldn't tell you. Obviously, anybody that wants to keep their levy flat is going to make more conservative assumptions just because of the way the math works, right? And the staff has to come back to the council, like when they come back, staff's going to have to say, here's what we assumed, to give you all comfort that you should issue and authorize the GO bonds. Now, that doesn't protect anybody that isn't here, in the future, but it does come to the council for the issuance of the bonds. And I think staff, knowing what the policy is, which is to have a flat levy, as the policy says, will be inclined to have to be conservative on the assumptions to meet that policy statement.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy with the history that we've had recently, and I for one, am not willing to start jacking with that. I'm supportive of the 2%. Any other comments? Okay, so consensus on leaving it at 2%?
No.
Okay, and wanting to take out the 2%?
Yes.
Yes, take out.
Okay, I think we have a consensus to leave the 2%. Okay. Thank
Mayor,
you.
the next steps is we are taking the draft policy for council approval at the voting meeting tonight. That concludes our presentation.
Mayor, I would like to make a comment if I could.
Go ahead.
So the genesis of this is that we have over the next few years, we have a large volume of bonds that are going to be getting paid off. But we also have a great deal of need in the city that in order to fulfill that need, we need to sell more bonds. We have to have the authorization to sell more bonds. And our goal, what we're trying to accomplish, is to assure our citizenry that our intention is only to sell bonds to the point that it fills the gap between what the levy is currently and what the levy will be currently, plus actual real growth in property value in the city with new construction and all of that comes in. So my concern was with the ballot language, which was prescribed. Some citizens might interpret that if they vote yes on the bond questions that are in front of them, that it would guarantee a property tax increase for them. And that is not at all our intention. And to be able to clean up or to develop this innovative, I think is the word you used for it, this innovative financial language to hopefully reassure our taxpayers that this council's intention is to keep their property tax rates flat, and but to also have the financial strength to be able to fulfill the needs that they have in the community in the future going forward. So, thank you.
Okay, you done?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, item number 2.
Item 2, Property Owner Preservation Program Follow-Up.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report today is our Director of Development Services, Jean Marino. She'll be joined by Mike Hess. I just changed your name, Mike. Sorry about that. It's Matthew Hess, of course. But
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide some follow-up from the workshop where we presented this program to you about 2 weeks ago. We just have a couple of things that we wanted to get some final direction from you on and to provide you an update with where we were at on the planning, since you did provide consensus direction at that last workshop to move forward. So the items that we're going to cover for today, those 4 specific areas that you identified for follow-up, specifically looking at, are there opportunities to target market this program to certain types of properties or property owners, to discuss the program funding caps based on information that we did with research, addressing quality assurance and fraud prevention, and then also the communication plan. So Mr. Hess and I will kind of go back and forth a little bit today, but we do need to get some very specific consensus direction from you on 2 of the big items. One is, and we'll talk in detail about how this could potentially work, about direction to apply local preference for some specific qualifying characteristics, and then whether or not there's consensus about the research that we've conducted in terms of recommending some program limits. So first up is to discuss the local preference option. So at the last workshop, Council had expressed a potential desire to determine if there was a way to target market this particular program or limit participation in this program to single-family property owners or individual property owners. And so we went back and did some research, and there actually is a good model that HUD utilizes in our public housing programs, and it's called the application of local preference. And so essentially what Council does for that process is you identify the types of tenants that you want us to target for our housing choice voucher and public housing programs. And then when we receive those applications are rated and preference points are applied to those applications. Then what would happen with those preference points, we do have to have those clearly defined on the front end so that people know going into it, I'll get preference points for my application for these specific types of characteristics. All of the applications would still go into the lottery. We would do the lottery poll, and then those ones that were selected from the lottery, they would be sorted and pulled in accordance with the preference points that were applied. So just to give you an example, a couple of the things, if Council did choose to want to target specifically single-family residential, you could apply a preference point for that. You could also limit it to say that if Jean owned more than 4, Jean doesn't get a preference point for that because she has an enterprise going on with that. You could do something like that. You could also say
Jean is in business for herself and she's an individual property owner, Jean could get 1 preference point on that application for that. If Jean and Matt were in business together, Jean and Matt would not get that preference point for being an individual or sole proprietor. So that's sort of the concept. So that is what we would really need some direction from you on today. It can be designed any way that the council would like to see fit. The questions would need to be very specific that we would ask on the application because that would allow us to apply those preference points. So as an example, you would ask the question on the single family residential, do you own more than 4 properties? Yes, you would not get a preference point, that would be 0. No would be 1. So that's how that would work. Are you an individual owner or a sole proprietor? Yes, you would get 1 preference point. No, you would get 0 preference points. So that's generally how something like that would work. And again, once it wouldn't be exclusively limiting applicants based on those preference points. Everyone would still be able to have the luck of the draw in a lottery style drawing. It's just that when we pull those ones that had those applied preference points would be given preference as we're awarding those grants moving forward. This is when we discussed it and looked at different options, because it is modeled after an existing HUD program, staff did feel like this was the most appropriate way if council did want to identify some selected preferences based on targeted characteristics.
Mayor, members of council, the second item that we wanted to discuss and follow up with you was regarding your request about funding caps, if there should be a cap on the amount of funding or the value of rent for each of the units. To do that, we looked into the MLS and we went back 9 months from the beginning of the year. We also wanted to do a year-over-year comparison over the same 9 months. And you can see in 2019, the median rent, which happened to be a 3-bedroom unit, was about $1,500. The same period in the subsequent year in 2020, that has gone up to $1,625. So you can see that rents are continuing to increase in Glendale. We also looked at units by zip code, and you can see all zip codes in the city are represented here. The low median is about $1,200 per month with a high of $1,895 per month. If we were to establish a cap at $2,000 per unit, for example, which is a recommendation that we request your direction on, we would be able to cover 84% of all units in the city without running any kind of risk of covering luxury type units, which is really not a preferred. It's not really what the money is intended for. So 2 big takeaways from this particular slide are that $2,000 per month would cover the vast majority of all units in the city, and also that would make units available for assistance in every single zip code in the city as well. So we would not necessarily be limiting it to any particular part of the city. Anyone could potentially be eligible.
Pardon me. So the next question that was raised was how would we conduct quality assurance and fraud prevention while still making sure that the program was easy to navigate and wasn't onerous for applicants? And so first and foremost, all programs that are funded through CDBG or otherwise are subject to a HUD review and audit at any point in time. So that is the first and foremost assurance. HUD is obviously the keeper of these funds, and they do watch over how we spend them. The second thing that we talked about is incorporating a quality assurance methodology for sampling the applications and ensuring and conducting quality checks to ensure that that they were meeting the minimum qualifications. The last piece of it is really making sure that we have the attestations and sort of like the legal disclaimer, which basically we would want the applicants, in order to receive the benefits, they have to attest that they would not be receiving any kind of duplication of benefits, or else it would be subject to a repayment. That the information that they're submitting is true and correct, which is always, standard. And then failure to comply with our requests for quality review or audit of what they have submitted is an automatic cancellation and recapture of benefit. So as an example, when we did our sampling, if we went to determine sole proprietor, as an example, or an individual owner, and we needed them to provide us with additional documentation for that on a sampling basis, and they refused to do that, then we would automatically cancel their benefit and recapture that. So those are some of the things that we've talked about in terms of assuring quality assurance, while at the same time being able to ensure that the process was streamlined, that it wasn't difficult to navigate, and that it wasn't going to slow down our process and being able to get the money into the people's hands before the end of the year. As an example, when you do sampling, typically what you'll do is you'll say, oh, we'll do a certain percentage of the overall sample. You'll pull a random sample. If you find any errors or anomalies, you'll pull another sample. We'll work with our internal audit program manager to identify the appropriate sample size and ensure that there's some kind of review over what our quality assurance program without trying to add that to the audit plan that can be absorbed as non-audit work.
And the last item that we wanted to follow up with you on for some direction is our communication outreach plan, how we're going to get this information to landlords, property owners throughout the city. We've undertaken a pretty robust process and working with our friends with public affairs to come up with a communication plan, including these elements, working with the business tax and license to look at business licenses. We have got contacts with neighborhood and homeowners associations, property managers, real estate companies on our typical website, social media type of outreach. We also have a postcard that is pretty much, I believe, right now being finalized for copy to be sent out to a list of approximately 4,800 landlords that we did purchase from a private vendor last week. They're going to print and mail those on our behalf. Our goal is to have that to the company today or tomorrow so that they can print that up and have that mailed out to each of those individual landlords, property owners sometime next week. Included in that, we also have the final copy of that postcard that could be available for council members to include in your newsletters to have a very, very standardized messaging between social media, your newsletters perhaps, and any press releases as well. So quite a bit has happened since we first addressed you on the 22nd. As I said, the postcard design is nearly complete. That final copy should be going to the printer in the next couple of days. We do have a list of business licenses through tax and license. We also have lists for property management companies that we work with. We're working pending council's consensus on some of the items that we've discussed today. We will have the program guidelines completed, and we will be running the application process through Zoom grants, which, if you recall, is typically how we undertake our regular grant allocation process. That's very well set up to do that. And then we are also in the process of finalizing those quality assurance items, as Ms. Moreno had indicated.
So with that, we would welcome discussion and additional questions from the council and are specifically looking for whether or not there's consensus to apply local preference points to applications that we receive based on characteristics that you're looking for. And then whether or not there's consensus based on the research that we've provided about the limitations and the cap. Just as a reminder that the CDBG funding is limited to 6 months of assistance, which is why, based on a $2,000 a month rent, it would be capped at $12,000 per unit. So with that, we're welcome to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, Gene, I've got a couple questions for you. I think I already know the answer, but want to get it out publicly. You've already talked with multi-housing folks, got some feedback from them on some programs that other cities are doing. And then I'd asked you the question with this close to $750,000 that we have to spend on this. How long do you think that will last before that's exhausted?
Mayor and members of the council, we expect this money to go very quickly. If we have property owners that have renters that haven't been able to pay for 6 months, you're talking about $12,000. I think when we did the math, it was about 70 units that we would be able to support. Now, granted, not everybody's going to be looking for that maximum amount, et cetera. But we do expect it to go very quickly.
Right, so with that, we're not expecting any new monies as of right now. We're hoping for, but there's no guarantee that we'll get it. So this is a program that we talked about 3 weeks ago that you had thought about before that, and meanwhile, these people are still in arrears on their rent. So I think it's something we need to act very quickly. Certainly don't want to put it off. We don't want families out on the street either. You had a question?
I did, thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions. I forgot to ask this when we talked about it a few weeks ago. Does this apply only to basically like long-term 12-month leases? What about month-to-month and shorter-term rentals? Do they qualify?
Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, we did not intend to limit if they weren't in a lease, because we know and we recognize we're dealing with that with just the regular rental assistance. Once my 12-month lease is up, I can go month to month without any penalties. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't be able to apply. Now, one of the things that we would ask, and it's similar with the other programs, is that those individual tenants would not be evicted unless they continued to not pay rent into the future. So no, there would not be any limitation if they weren't in an active lease. There would need to be documentation that there is some sort of an agreement that they are in a month to month.
Mayor, if I could, so what about vacation rentals? Are they excluded or?
Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, that's a very good point. Typically, what we would be looking for is a copy of a lease agreement with an individual, and typically in those lease agreements, it'll say, after that lease term that they can go month to month. Absent that, it would be very difficult to approve a payment like that, but you bring up a very good point. We should probably incorporate that this wouldn't apply to vacation rentals if that's council's desire.
Mayor, I have one follow-up to the cap. Is the cap based on the amount of rent, or let's say somebody's rent is $22.50? Do they qualify? Does the property owner qualify? They just get $2,000, or are they able to apply if the rent amount exceeds the $2,000 a month?
Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, they would be able to apply if the rent exceeded. They would be capped at the $12,000 or $2,000 a month. So there would be $250 a month in that scenario that the tenant would still be responsible for, or the landlord would have to make arrangements for. In a case where the rent was less than $2,000 a month, so $1,500, then it would be $1,500 times however many months they were behind in rent.
Okay, thank you. So if I could continue, that's what started swirling around my head is when the luxury rental amount, that obviously all property owners that aren't receiving rent, we would like to be able to help, but I think our intention, especially with limited resources, is not to be filling in gaps for a vacation rental that rents for $1,500 a week or whatever it is. So I just wanted to make sure that we're building a program that's not going to allow somebody who's, literally a citizen of Glendale who can't pay their rent, and I just don't know how we build that in, but I just wanted to bring it up, that was something that I wondered if we were looking into.
Owner?
Thank you, Mayor. Back on the, the quality assurance and fraud prevention. Is part of the process going to be where you will actually interview the lessee of the properties?
Mayor and Vice Mayor Malnar, so we would do that as part of the quality assurance program. One of the things that we would be doing is collecting information about who the lessee is and the tenant, and make sure that they received appropriate notification that we were paying their rent. because what we wouldn't want to have happen is if they didn't know and they kept paying or something like that. So yes, that is something that we're building into our process as part of the quality assurance piece of it, to ensure that the tenant is still living there, that kind of a thing. Yes, we would be doing spot checks on that. We are, if I recall correctly, Mr. Hess, we are we're collecting all of that information and the information about the lease, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Just to follow up on that, as part of this process, you mentioned that you're looking at individual owners and sole proprietors. So large corporations would not be eligible for this program, is that correct?
Mayor and Vice Mayor Malnar, they can apply, they just wouldn't receive the preference points. So as an example, if we pulled a lottery of 50 and there was one in there that was from a large corporation, they would rank towards the bottom of the list. Depends on how many were pulled in that list.
Okay. And then a follow-up to that, if I may, Mayor. The individual owner or sole proprietor, are they limited as to the number of units? I mean, you said here 4 units max. So what if they have four-unit complexes? Could they apply 4 different times?
Mayor and Vice Mayor Malnar, that's one of the things that we're looking for some specific direction from the council on is, do you want to limit it to a specific number of units? When we were having our discussions about the options and ways to do that, we do recognize that there are properties that may be a quadplex, where it's like a townhome or a condo style that have 4 units within that single property. So that parcel of property has 4 units. And so that would be where we would be looking for direction on. In a case where I was a property owner and I owned 4 plexes, I wouldn't get that preference point as is shown there because I actually own more than 4 units. But again, that's all at council's pleasure. If 4 is the right number, if that makes sense, if it's 12, 10, that's entirely at council's pleasure. We do know that there are properties out there where it's a single property, but there's 4 units on that property.
And just to follow up on that, my preference would be to help the most number of individuals versus awarding someone with more a larger number, if that makes sense. So I'd like to see it spread out as much as possible so that we're helping the maximum number of individual owners of these properties versus helping a less number and giving them a larger reward.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
that's what occurred to me as well, Gene. I want this to go to as many people as possible. And you said that your estimate was a maximum of around 70 recipients. And so if you start giving money out to people who have 4 plexes or 8 plexes or whatever, you're going to end up satisfying the needs of maybe half a dozen property owners. I would rather know that there were 70 individuals out there that got helped with whatever funds were available. Thank you. But other than that, I think you've clarified a great deal. You've done a great job in refining the program, and I'm comfortable with what you're presenting.
Yeah, I have to question the math, though. If an apartment was $1,000 and there were 70, I mean, that's 70,000, not 700,000.
Mayor, members of council, it's a little difficult to give an exact determination as to the number of units or the number of property owners because
I understand, but it's considerably more than 70 apartments. And, it could be one tenant for 6 months type of thing for 1,500 each. But I'm just saying, when we say 70, it gives the impression that we're only talking about 70 people are going to get help at one time, and it's actually more than that.
Mayor, if I could ask a clarifying question. So you're saying if I was a owner of a complex and I had 70 units and I was applying on behalf of my tenants, is that what the
No, I was trying to clarify what Councilmember Clark had said. 70 people would get helped. It's not, that's not actually correct. If it was $2,000 a month and it was 70 people, that's 140,000. Now, if each one of them was behind 6 months, then that would make sense. But not all of them are going to be behind 6 months. Not all of them are going to be $1,500 per month. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then also, everybody keep in mind that we're not helping just the tenants, but we're also helping the landowners. It's both. It makes a big difference for both. So I do like the idea of spreading out as much as possible, but if there's 6 apartments, those are still tenants that need help, or they're going to be on the street. So, I mean, I think we're all trying to figure out the best thing to do. We just don't have enough money to make it happen as well as we'd like.
Mayor, point well taken. I use 70 because Gene used 70.
Right.
But I understand that it certainly could be more than 70 people, but I also understand that the resources are very limited. And because they are very limited, I think it's important that we try to help as many people / families as we can with those limited resources, whether it's for 1 month or 6 months of back rent. I just don't want to end up helping a half a dozen or 10 landlords in the community. That's great for them, but there's a whole bunch of people that will go unserved in that kind of scenario.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't questioning your thoughts.
Sure.
All right. So is there a consensus for the plan that they currently have put up in front of us?
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Guess we do have some next steps, sorry, just to
Just to
keep you
provide you.
informed.
Now that we have your consensus, there are a few things that we will be doing in the next few days to a week. We will be finalizing the program guidelines, the application, getting that up in Zoom grants. Our goal is to have the program live November 1st for applications, leave that open for a 2-week period, close the application on November 15th, and then ultimately, or ideally, to have all of the applicants selected and approved and have all the money out into the community by the 1st or 2nd week of December.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
I would suggest that the city of Glendale put on his website now, look for more information about rental assistance. Program is only open from November 1st to 15th, something like that. Forewarn people that it's coming so that they can get prepared for that very short window of 2 weeks.
Thank you.
I'd like you to take your time, but hurry.
Mayor?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I'm a little unclear on the consensus, or consensus says that we reached. Did we have a consensus whether we were going to use the median rent or the 2,000 level rent, $2,000 rent?
Mayor and Councilmember Turner, so what we had presented as the options seeking your consensus direction were using the $2,000 a month maximum monthly rent for a maximum of $12,000 per unit if they're behind by that much. And then providing preference points if the unit is a single-family residential unit, and if the property owner has less than 4 units, and then if they're an individual or sole proprietor, an additional preference point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Item 3.
Item 3, West Valley Innovation Technology Center.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide item number 3 today will be led by Brian Friedman and Jesse Peterson, our Assistant Director of Economic Development.
I don't think it's Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Actually, with me here today is Ron Babich. He is the founder and chair of the West Valley Innovation Alliance, and he will take an opportunity to introduce himself here in a second as we kind of just do a quick overview of what we're here today for. So we're excited to share a little bit about Mr. Babbage, his organization, and the proposed West Valley Innovation Technology Center with you all today. Just a quick overview of what the presentation is going to look like today. We're first going to do just a real brief terminology, understanding what an incubator is, what an accelerator is, what that difference is, how that relates to what we're presenting today. Then I'll have Mr. Babbage explain what the West Valley Innovation Alliance is. Then we'll go into the opportunity that exists here for us today and open it up for discussion and questions. So very quickly, you probably have all heard different terms. I know many of you are familiar with the term incubator, the term accelerator. What we have on the screen here is really just what both of them essentially do. They offer mentoring, education, training programs, events. In some models, there's investment opportunities. The reason we wanted to talk about both of these terms is really to explain that we're not here to present just an incubator or just an accelerator. It's the reason why we're calling this the West Valley Innovation Technology Center, because as Mr. Babbage will explain, what his organization does is provides resources and programming that would relate to both of those. Ron, if you have anything additionally you'd like to add to what an incubator versus an accelerator is, please feel free.
No, awesome job.
So I'm going to turn it over to Rod now to really explain, one, who he is, just to introduce himself, his journey from where he started to how the West Valley Innovation Alliance came to be, and then to really go into the opportunity here.
Thank you. Mayor, members of the council, thanks for having me here today, and thanks for letting us go over this today. Just a little bit quick about myself that I'd like to share. I've been in Glendale since 1978, a graduate of Apollo High School, went to GCC, then ASU. I've been very fortunate. I've been a member of the technology community in Arizona all of that time. I've had 2 IPOs here. We've had 4 private equity exits, and we've raised capital a bunch of time. And I have 5 kids and a wife that I've been married to for 30-plus years here in the state as well, in Glendale. So all of those organizations have been in the East Valley or North Central, and the issue and the challenge for us in the West Valley is this perception that instead of having all these smart people, which we do, and all this high-tech resources, which we do, they wind up being in the East Valley, and they wind up housing themselves in Central Phoenix and et cetera, or the North Scottsdale corridor, tech corridor. So the West Valley Innovation Alliance was created a few years ago to help kind of change that perception, and I'm going to share a couple things about that. The West Valley Innovation Alliance is a nonprofit. It has strong ties to the West Valley, of course. We lead the West Valley in a technology industry growth to help promote West Valley companies that are technology-based and innovation. Over the last couple of years, we've done a few things. We've helped fund over 16 companies. We've attracted over 200 members, including banking, finance, tech, and education. And we provided a bunch of on-site and remote programming to all 15 West Valley cities, including our contiguous cities here in the West Valley. Our partners are pretty vast, so this is a very passionate thing for not just Glendale and not for myself, but also you see up there ASU, Glendale Community College is a strong partner, Westmec, BNC, SRP is a strong financial partner, Westmark, et cetera. So there's a lot of passion for this in the West Valley, as you can imagine. So just to kind of like explain real quick how it operates, we essentially take a company or an individual in, they make an application, we evaluate whether there's funding available or not. We help that company or that individual with focus. We then help the learning process to get them from point A to point B. We help bring that network together of all these folks from financial to technical to analytical and all of that kind of stuff. And then eventually there's this demo day, graduation day, where they kind of graduate the whole program. Just to kind of give you some background or into it, we're helping a few things. One is we're helping companies get to investor-ready startups, essentially getting to them to the point where they can be on their own and take their own wings, if you will. We also build that investor ecosystem where it's been apprehensive in the past to get companies to come to the West Valley. We're helping kind of bring credibility to that by doing that. The mentorship program is a big part of that, where we bring in, there's so many folks that we have here in the West Valley that have the exit background, so we're making those connections. And then we're also centralizing the education resources. So up to this point, we've been kind of bouncing around to Westmex and different facilities, but we centralize kind of all that education process. We empower our community by providing those resources kind of in the center of all these things so that they're here and they know about them. And then lastly, we unify the city collaboration. So without this, We've got a lot of disparity out there, but this is kind of the first effort of its kind that kind of brings everybody together, which is extremely nice and valuable. So the challenge that we can, and I'll just explain this kind of really quickly. On the left-hand side, what do those mean is we have students, we have entrepreneurs, we have startup companies, all of which have super innovative ideas. But then on the right-hand side, we have mentors, companies, and investors. And on the next slide, we have a bunch of mayhem. So in the current state, there's this kind of disconnect of where do I go, where do I get help, where do I get education, how do I get assistance to get my company off the ground? We're here to help fix that. So for the last few years, we've been providing the programming, we've been doing pitch events on a regular basis, we've been creating West Valley credibility that was kind of an empty hole prior to this, and West Valley synergy between both those groups. And that's really what we bring to the table. The reality is that the side of that red line there is I-17. West of I-17, this is the awakening moment, is that less than 2% of all the tech companies in the valley are here in the West Valley. And that's the big perception, and that's the big change that we want to make. More blue dots. We do, however, have 35 computer science and IT programming folks right here in the West Valley. So they're here. We're just not situating the right, workforce jobs here.
I'm going to make you repeat that, Ron. 35,000.
35,000. 35,000. Yeah. And then the average income from those folks on our surveys is 95,000. So it's not only good employment, but it's good employment for the community, obviously, because of the income that our tech folks bring into the community. And the biggest picture of this all is that we already have a Central Phoenix corridor, there's a North Scottsdale Tech corridor, there's an East Valley. By Glendale participating and doing this, we're stretching out the valley and we're making a reputation that's a bigger picture for even just from a city perspective. This becomes a regional play.
So that leads us to the proposal and the opportunity that Ron and Wavia have brought forward to us today. So we really wanted to let Ron kind of talk through specifically that tech industry to give that overview of what that gap is that we're trying to fill here, so we really understand the purpose. And so the proposal that we are looking for some guidance, some discussion, and some consensus on today. So right now, Ron is working through the process of seeking a $1 million grant with the Economic Development Administration, so the federal EDA, to establish this center. And through the CARES Act, the EDA has been provided some additional funds, and they have a lot more flexibility associated with them to only further add to communities these types of centers and projects. So with the city's contribution as the municipal partner that he would be seeking, the request was a facility to be able to operate the center in. And after long discussions with Ron about different options for how to make things work and what possible role the city could play, his request of us was what we're here today now, is the city-owned facility here in downtown, the former Bede Museum building. So that's at 5754 West Glen Drive. It's approximately 6,500 square feet. And the request would be for Wavia to be able to operate this center in that facility here in downtown for an initial 2-year term. And when we ran the real estate comps to determine what a full-service gross lease would look like, to understand what that value is that the city would be providing to this partnership, based on real estate comps in this submarket for office space specifically that were comparable to that particular facility, the value of that is about $108,000 a year. We also wanted to point out, as was really important to us, that beyond just the opportunity to be able to participate with Ron and offer up a currently vacant city property as an opportunity for us to partner, we want to talk about those benefits. So obviously Ron has a lot of options here in the West Valley that he could choose, and he has asked Glendale to be his partner. I will share that I know, based on what Ron has shared with us, that other cities have been interested in working with him for this very project. But he came to us, and he specifically came looking to do this in downtown. And part of the reason was, as Ron mentioned, he has history here with Glendale, but also, Apollo High School not far away, but also saw the opportunity to a win-win specifically with downtown. Not only do you create that perception change for an entire city and a valley, the region of the West Valley, with bringing in tech jobs and the tech industry, but you also bring a perception in change in downtown that's really needed. You bring in increased, consistent activity an exposure to downtown that we all have recognized is needed down here, and really that catalyst through partnerships for collaborative opportunities. And what we mean by that is, as part of what Ron does, is they bring in events and they associate those with other industries, not just the technology industry. So that's working with arts, cultural organizations, and Ron can certainly elaborate on that if there's questions about what some of those events have looked like. But when we start looking at other parts of the valley that have similar opportunities for their communities, we recognize that synergy is pretty high.
Mayor?
Mr. Eldon was chomping at the bits wanting to talk. Go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate
this is a
that.
good
I
one.
really am. There's not much mic left here. I'm really excited that, Ron, you would choose the West Valley, but specifically Glendale, and then more specifically downtown to bring this innovation to us. That really is a smart thing to do. I'm familiar with the CEI over on 40th Street, so it does the same thing. Just phenomenal what it can do to a downtown like ours. Question for you, how long is the program, and then how do you ensure more clients coming through to that program? So you kind of lined it out all the way to the demo day.
Yeah.
How long is that what's the duration of that?
Mayor, members of the council, so it's split up to a couple of things. So we have pitch events that are ongoing. Those are typically quarterly for us. The actual program itself is about a 6 to 7 week program for each new entry, and that's also ongoing. And then we also, through the partnership program with GCC, Estrella Mountain College, their curriculum is also offered as well too. So it's super perpetual.
Excellent. And then how do you, and so that's how you, is it the colleges that are helping you bring more clients in?
Yeah, and Westmark and Westmac. So it's really, it's smart for us to be as kind of tentacle driven as we can. We're very member related as far as events go.
And Jesse said it earlier, it's no secret that other West Valleys are looking, chomping at the bit to get you to their area, and we have you right here. So I'd like to hear from the council, but thank you for thinking of us, and this would be a great place for innovation.
Thank you.
Starting innovation companies for the West Valley. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, question I have for you, is there any possibility that as this sort of starts growing, that there might be opportunities for our civic center to be utilized for different events with what you'd be doing?
Mayor, that's a great question. I'm only going to steal it from Ron because we've recently talked about this, of some of those, not just the Civic Center either, but other areas, whether they're outdoor or indoor events, that Ron has already been talking, because we're partners already, about some of those events, him having an actual location down here where his membership and folks who are participating in his programming are already familiar with downtown will only help make those events even more successful. So short answer, yes.
You could have just said yes. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Mayor. So I see that it's contingent on receiving the grant, which I get. Are you talking about a use agreement or a lease, or?
Mayor, Councilmember Tomajoff, that's something that we've talked to Mr. Bailey about, of what that mechanism might look like. I think at this stage, we were first looking if we're interested in formalizing a partner, and would allow him from the legal standpoint to let us know what the most appropriate tool would be relative to it being part of a grant.
Okay. My other question is, what other financial obligation would there be for the city in addition to, waiving the fee or the rent for the use of the space, tenant improvements, utilities, that sort of thing?
Mayor, Councilmember Tomajoff, that's a great question. So when we referenced on the previous slide the notion of a full-service gross lease, so the equivalent of that, what the full-service gross lease is it would include utilities as an example. So that's what that comp was showing. Relative to tenant improvements, we would not be responsible for the tenant improvements to the property. The only cost that would be necessary would be really just that setup to get a certificate of occupancy to meet building codes. After talking to Michelle Watanko's team, that's relatively nominal. My understanding is in the $20,000 to $25,000 range that could be done in 6 to 8 weeks. That would be required for anybody to occupy that building at this stage, which would be a one-time, not ongoing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Babich, welcome. Good to have another fellow Hawk in the room. This is exciting, and it's got my support. I have a couple of questions. Councilmember Tomajoff hit on two of them, which were particularly the tenant improvements and the utility costs, so those are answered. We also have some of this type of innovation and support activity happening up at the Glendale Main Library with the Idea Center, the Service Corps retired executives, innovation curriculum and others I'm sure that I'm missing. Will this work together with that? Will they stay separate? Will that move down here? What do you have in mind?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, that's actually a really great question, and it helps us really understand why this is so important, what Ron's providing. So for folks who aren't familiar with the Idea Center there at the library that Councilmember Turner has championed and is referring to, what economic development as a department and then in conjunction with the library are offering there is really an opportunity for folks to come and take advantage of different types of programming, one of them being the startup school that we've done with ASU, where our team is actually teaching those classes to startup businesses and entrepreneurs across all industries. One of the issues that we run into when we're working, whether it's with the Small Business Development Center or even through other types of programming like that, is really it's filling that gap of once somebody has gone through that ideation stage, where do they go next when they're actually ready to start their business? And what Ron is doing over with WAVIA specifically is really that next stage and that next step. So when we talk about incubation or acceleration, it's really where do you send those companies, those entrepreneurs, those startups next? And so Ron's programming is really focused on those steps. So absolutely, they'll work in conjunction. The Idea Center will not leave the library at all. That is still an opportunity for anybody who's interested, whether it's an entrepreneur, job seekers, to be able to go there and get the resources that they need. It'll really only help enhance really the benefit of what's taking place at the library.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and if I can continue. So, yeah, I'm not being territorial here. If the best place for the Idea Center is in here, then that would be fine. I'm just wondering how it will work together. So that might be, for a lot of people, what we offer at the main library, Idea Center and all of that, might be step one.
Yeah.
Or step two, their garage or their first idea. And then for some of those people, maybe step two might be coming down here to this facility. What would be step three? Would we be spinning off businesses that might occupy space downtown or elsewhere in the West Valley, or what would we look at?
Yes, that's exactly it. So after the graduation process, this is really such a regional thing. That's why this is such a big deal for us too, is that it not only helps the city of Glendale, but the West Valley as a whole, because from a regional perspective, all of these newly graduated resources on programming, development, companies that are in the startup programs, now, instead of going over to Scottsdale or South Phoenix or Central Phoenix or wherever, now they're staying put here and planting their seeds here.
Sounds like a great program. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is a great program. It's long overdue. Other cities have been doing this for several years already, so we're kind of late to the party. I actually think the Bead Museum is too small, and that you really belong in a larger facility, but I guess you take what you can get and you start with what you can get, and the Bead Museum it will be. It's too bad we can't find a space here in City Hall that's larger and put you in that, because I think that's where you belong, is in City Hall, where you have access to resources from various city departments that could provide wonderful resources to any kind of startup company, especially if it was on the tech side. So go for it. You've got my support, and I'm looking forward to hearing about great things about the facility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, and I need to make a comment. Actually, this council, well, not all of this council, some of this council, about 7 years ago, it actually voted to do an incubator, and it was approved, and it just never happened. So we were trying a long time ago, and I think this is actually sort of like the IKEA thing. It looks like this is actually going to be better than what we originally were trying to do. I just wish we could have got it earlier, but I'm really pleased that we're moving forward as we are right now. Any other questions? What do you need from us?
Mayor, just to confirm, so on the slide we have that we just want to confirm that there is consensus to formalize this partnership and move forward, which would require us to bring some form of that legal mechanism to a council meeting for a formal vote.
Do we have a consensus? Yes. It looks like so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Item 4.
Item 4, special events update for FY 2020-21.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report is our department Director, Jim Burke, from Parks and Recreation Special Events.
When you're ready, just. Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon. This is a follow-up to our August workshop on special events. We're going to give you a briefing on what we're proposing for Glendale Glitters and the challenges. As you know, this is a challenging time with COVID and the executive order limiting gatherings over 50 people. And then a timeline for the other events following and later into the season and when we recommend decision points on that. With that, I'd like to ask Heidi to go ahead and give you the rundown on the options for the first event, Glendale Glitters.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you again for having me back just a little bit later than my last presentation. What I have up on the screen for you right now is option A of Glendale Glitter Spectacular. You'll see this is just one day, November 27th, 2020, which is the Friday that follows Thanksgiving. And for this, like Mr. Burke had mentioned, due to the pandemic, the traditional festival in the downtown area won't take place. But what this option A does suggest is that the mayor and the council are present in the downtown area with an MC, and we do a lighting of the holiday lights in the downtown area, which this year are at 1.7 million lights. With that, a location hasn't been chosen. We can do it in the amphitheater. We can move it up here by the Christmas tree. That's still up for discussion. But this event does have a tree lighting in the downtown area. Option B that I have here for you is again November 27th, which is the Friday that follows Thanksgiving. And this option B is a pre-taped lighting ceremony that we would broadcast virtually at 6 o'clock when the lights go on. With this, an MC would guide the viewers through a short program that's pre-taped. We would have you flipping a switch, either here in the downtown area or in front of a green screen somewhere. And we'd have some holiday performances that we could pre-tape, COVID-safe in the studio. With this option, we'd advertise it as a holiday watch party and it would be broadcast across social media. With that, what we have in our pocket as well is the timeline for the upcoming events. As we know, Glendale and Glitter Glow is just around the corner as it's January 9th. And in order to get this event going and make it happen, we do need to have a deadline of our decision by November 16th. And that is our goal on whether we can move forward before we actually have to start spending monies on it. The chocolate the chocolate experience as well, which is February 13th and 14th here at the Civic Center, we have that same deadline of November 16th in order to get the vendors booked and start programming and advertising for that. You'll see up here on the screen is the list of the new proposed dates. The only thing that has changed here for you is the Glendale Glitters. We just have the one date of November 27th where we would have either option A or option B on how we light the 1.7 million lights in the downtown area. And our next steps here is to get a consensus from you all on which option we would like to move forward with for the lighting of the lights.
I guess I'll start it off. I like option C. If you're not going to have crowds gather there, I don't know why we would do a fake ceremonial lighting. I mean, to me, it seems like it's kind of taken away. I would prefer, probably more than anything, is just turn the lights on, let people show up, and then maybe we show past footage of past years. So you don't have to hire an MC and you don't have to spend extra money. That's just my personal preference, but I personally like option C best. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think that's option C is a better idea. We don't want to do anything to encourage people to congregate right now. And I think if we did A, that's exactly what would happen. B, B and C are so close. I would rather just turn the lights on and offer holiday programming via Channel 11 and our social media during that season. Makes more sense to me. Thank you.
Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree that we need to continue the tradition of flipping the switch in person. We don't advertise that to the extent that people come out, otherwise we'd be just violating the order. I do like the idea of B-rolling last year's for the public, but COVID can end the traditional downtown events, and that's not what we're saying. So I would say keep on the tradition, flipping the switch in person, just the council, and a select few of employees. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. It's really sad that it's this is the times that we're living in, but I think in any scenario, having the council come down and flip the switch comes with it a crowd of people. And I don't know that that would be a responsible thing for us to do. And I see Councilmember Turner laughing, not to come and see us, but I mean, people literally are trained that, you know, that the council's gonna flip the lights on and that there's gonna be a countdown and it's gonna be an event and they're gonna come down for that. So if we're trying to avoid the crowd, and I mean, option B of videotaping something ahead of time, I think, in my opinion anyways, kind of distasteful. It's really hard to say. I mean, I think we're better off not doing anything, or if we were going to do something, it would have to be someplace not in the amphitheater or any place like that, and then that takes away from the whole event that you're trying to do. Because if we go to the amphitheater, it's going to fill up with people waiting for us to flip the switch. So I think we're probably better off not getting a crowd of people downtown. They'll come downtown, and the restaurants did very well the last couple of years. There's a lot of people down here just on the quiet nights, walking around and enjoying the lights. You know, if the media wants, we could advertise when the lights are being turned on, I think. That they're gonna be turned on Friday, and maybe not a time, but that people know the lights are gonna come on when it gets dark on Friday, on whatever, the 27th. And there probably will be a lot of people down here anyway, because people know that's when the lights are gonna come on. But us coming down here, I think, makes it too much of an event, in my opinion. It's sad, though.
Could I offer maybe another thought? What if each council member had the opportunity to do just a holiday season message that was live streamed, and then again show old footage of flipping on a switch at other times? And then just simply have the lights on. I mean, just like any other day of the week, just have the lights on. We don't want to discourage people from coming out, but we just don't want the mass crowds. That's my opinion. But
Thank you, Mayor. I'm good with option C. I think it makes sense. And I'm also good with the holiday message and having some programming that we can run on Channel 11, our YouTube, social media, to let people, because, I mean, we haven't even said it here today. We need to let people know the lights are going to be on. That's the big thing they come down for, and that's what they enjoy with the family, is that the lights will be on beginning the Friday after Thanksgiving and running all the way through January 9th. The lights are on. Let's make sure that we don't message away from that. We've run into that block in the past a couple times where, you know, people thought that it was canceled, when no, we just, you know, downscaled a few weekends or something like that. So let's make sure that the messaging is that Glendale Glitter's still happening. The lights are on. Come on down. We're not having the extravaganza weekend, you know. And then we have stuff that runs on social media just to keep it present in people's minds and all of that. But then that also gets back to the discussion that we had last time you were here, and that is, what else can we provide? Are we going to be investing in more interactive type things where people, you know, selfie stations is one of the things we talked about, and maybe having a selfie trail through the downtown where people can go and, you know, take selfies with, you know, Santa Claus, either real or, you know, a cutout, or those, you know, all of the reindeer, you know, whatever around downtown, so that when people come down here, they have something to do, and that motivates them to move around the downtown so that there's still some foot traffic for the business community here. And so that's what I'm looking forward to, and that doesn't occur just on what would have been our extravaganza weekend, but those are the kind of things that can occur throughout the festival, spread the crowd out over the course of a number of weeks and every day of the week, so that no matter when they come down here, they get to experience some unique things that still create the memories with their families. That is the reason they love Glendale Glitter so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a way, this probably might not be because it's not necessarily special events, but can we have the community, different dance groups, music groups, choral groups submit things for us to show on Channel 11 during the holidays, that we'd have, like hometown kind of, I don't know if we've looked at doing something to try to, we're going to have to, it's obviously going to be different this year, but there's still going to be, people singing and people performing. Is there a way we could incorporate that into what we're, the different, that holiday season that we're going to be experiencing? Probably a question for Brent or somebody else.
Mayor, members of council, yes, I think that's something we can follow up on and work with the public affairs folks in Channel 11 and try to coordinate that, get the community word out, and then collect some tapes and put them on during the season.
I mean, a lot of people come down here and perform, the dancers and down in the amphitheater, and if we could get them to record it and submit it to us and obviously edit it and make sure, that but get it on, it still kind of will give a sense of community that we're enjoying the performances. I would like to at least try to do that if we can.
Mayor, if I could, I don't know whether our studio would be a place in which that could occur too, and and still stay within CDC guidelines. But whatever, I think that's a great idea, is to keep not just things that we've done in the past, but also if there's an opportunity for people to still be connected. And I know I had mentioned selfie stations or the ornament, walk through ornament, and those kind of different things. But it can also be musicians that are set up on various street corners or in the promenade or that sort of thing, where there's holiday music available or other music available too, so that all through the downtown there's small things to appreciate and that provide that hometown atmosphere that aren't a big extravaganza, but people still get a chance to. It's not just the lights. The lights are the key, but that's what I'm looking for, and it may be barbershop quartet or an ensemble from the high school, or a choir, a six-person choir group from a local church. But those are the kind of things that I think that we can do that'll provide the atmosphere that people like without filling up the amphitheater and that sort of thing, or having people elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, walking past the tents and all of that they might be used to. We're not going to have that type of a thing, but we can have something just as special, I think.
A couple things. If we don't do this, can you give me just a rough idea of how much money we won't spend?
Well, part of that, Mayor, will be what the other spends are for some of the activities Mr. Turner has mentioned, whether we bring down selfie stations, purchase programming, music, activity, but I think Heidi has the budget.
Mayor, as a member of the council, for Glendale Glitter Spectacular Weekend, it was $124,914.
Okay, so the reason I asked that question, and I'm certainly not advocating that we spend all of the money if we don't have to, but if we took advantage of technology and the fact that most of these phones will take incredible recordings, and most people have gotten very good at doing that, what if we encourage people to do an event at their place, whether it's a dance routine or music or whatever, submit it, and then we give awards, and then actually have a program that we could air that on. Kind of a neat way of still promoting Glendale Glitters afar. It's not necessarily in Glendale, but I think might be kind of a neat way and still keep the interest up, might generate a lot of interest. Where in the past, people showed up, they just showed up. At least now they have a chance to submit, and if they're on the program, potentially we could have some prize money for them. That's question number one. I'd kind of like the council to kind of kick on you if whether they like that idea or not. And secondly, if we don't do this, why don't we turn our lights on earlier? Why not have it available for Thanksgiving weekend when a lot of people are actually out?
Mayor, so you, maybe Thanksgiving Day or Thanksgiving evening, turn them on, that would
Yeah.
signal the beginning of the holiday season. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. I was thinking precisely that. There's the holidays, Christmas and everything is really going to be different. There most likely won't be a Black Friday where folks go out after Thanksgiving. So having the lighting early makes really good sense. I'll tell you right now, and Councilmember, you are absolutely right. It's still dangerous out there, in my opinion, for individuals to be gathered around. But if we don't turn on the lights, and by the way, they're already installed, if we don't turn on the lights, that really sends a message that we're done, we've given up, and we're just not going to have them again. So I feel that we do turn on the lights. I do like that earlier and get them in November. People will be at home. They're not going to be in shopping malls because they're still closed. And then I still feel we do flipping the switch. And I'm okay doing it here. If it's an off date different than when we typically do it, people won't show up. But if we have to do it in the studio, that's okay too, as long as it's Facebook Live. We've met the asks of our community, and I think the lights would draw them in. Councilmember Turner, the selfie stations is great. It'll bring business and pedestrian traffic around downtown. I think that helps. But I can't support not turning the lights off. But Councilmember is correct. It's still to an extent that it's still dangerous out there for people to be gathered. But turn the lights on and turn them on early.
And then a follow-up question, what about people submitting their routines or acts for potential prize money?
Yeah, so I have a concern with that because I don't know that organizations out there are still willing to gather if it's a youth group, getting the youth groups together, more than 10, more than 15. I don't know if there's any musical acts that are still doing that. So I think everybody's still under the governor's order that you shouldn't be around people 50 or more. And then that's trickling down to people with organizations that don't want to bring students in or young kids in that do a lot of these acts. And so I just don't think we're going to get them all out. I couldn't be supportive of that.
Right, and again, it was not them bringing them here. They do it on their own.
Oh,
at their own place.
Virtual, if you will. Yeah, I think that's
Then they would
great.
submit that to us, was what I was
And
saying.
they'd have to follow the CDC guidelines on their own, wherever
Right.
it is that they're filming. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor. Has there been any discussion about whether or not we should be allowing vendors in the park at all this season, since we're, because especially food vendors with the, with the conditions that we're living in right now, and then also the cost and the ongoing issue of trying to monitor rogue vendors. I just don't know whether there's been any discussion whether we're going to allow any vendors to set up down here at all or not.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilwoman Tomachov, we have not recommended having any vendors in the park or closing the street or doing the event type scale. As to the rogue vendors and the code issues, I'd have to defer to someone else to answer that. I don't know if Rick would have I know we're talking about having some extra efforts to address it because in years past it's been a problem. But
Well, and Mayor, if I could, if we're not allowing vendors, it'll be much easier then any vendor is rogue, because if we're not allowing vendors, so it's going to be much easier to monitor, I would think.
Mayor, members of the council, vendors that have licenses to vend on our streets are capable of vending in the downtown area, provided we don't have an event where the downtown area is closed and we only invite a certain number of vendors into the closed portion of the downtown area. I'd have to defer to Mr. Bailey on whether we could keep vendors from coming into the downtown area on non-event evenings. My belief as former chief as your Deputy City Manager for Public Safety is we don't have a mechanism to do that. But again, I'll defer to Mr. Bailey.
Mayor and Council, Mr. St. John is correct. There is no mechanism in place. The challenge becoming that we have already authorized them to be a street vendor in the city of Glendale.
Mayor?
And the issue being is that if you want to prevent them, then you're going to have to shut down streets, you're going to have to close things, and if you're going to close them down, then we have to go through the legal analysis of why are we closing them, and then are we now starting to discriminate against commercial, and the snowball just keeps getting bigger.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Two things. I think your idea is great. Let's invite every local group, get the word out there and let them know that we're holding a holiday contest. And I think the idea of awarding cold hard cash is also great too, because that's what generates a lot more interest. As for downtown vendors, I don't know why we can't pass a simple resolution that says between now and the end of the year due to COVID, we discourage or prohibit's too strong a word perhaps, but discourage any types of activities that would encourage a crowd to congregate. I don't know what the exact verbiage should be, but something that sends a clear message out to vendors that we would prefer during this holiday season, during COVID, that they not come down to downtown as they have in years past.
So I guess the question I have is, right now, currently, if a food vendor has his state of Arizona, his Maricopa County, his city license, he can set up pretty much anywhere if he stays within his truck. Do we really care if it's trucks, as long as we're not setting up areas where they have corrals and all that?
Food trucks.
Just a standard food truck. I mean, is that a big deal? That doesn't draw huge crowds normally, but they can legally do that already.
Well, it's the whole idea of food preparation and eating food without a mask, and you get in all kinds of weird situations. I just think discouraging people from doing that activity between now and the end of the year would be.
And I don't know if we legally can, but if we're not actually having a real event, I don't know if you're going to have the food truck show up, and we still want the local restaurants to get the business.
Of course we do.
Mayor?
So, go ahead.
I thought there was a process for the vendors to set up down here we've had a few controversies over who was allowed to, so I'm just not sure how.
When we have the roads blocked.
How now, right, so now that we're not doing it, that just anyone who's got a license can come down here and set up?
Mayor, members of the council, that's correct.
But Mayor and Council, if I may, they have to be licensed with the city. So when you say just anybody can come down here and set up, that's not entirely accurate. And to the mayor's point is that when we focus on this analysis, we're looking at primarily food trucks, because a food truck can come down and park on private property at any point in time.
Right.
And I think what restricted them historically is we closed down streets and we closed down elements to public traffic.
Well, food trucks have a specific statute that allows them.
Right.
But I'm not talking about food trucks. I'm talking about other mobile vendors that come down here and set up, not food trucks. I know food trucks basically are exempt, that they can go wherever they want to pretty much by state statute. But other mobile vendors that we have down here selling hot chocolate out of the back of their Suburban and whatever else they're doing, I don't think that's a good idea. I think so. So how do we, I mean, under the mayor's executive we're basically still under COVID restrictions. You've never rescinded your declaration of emergency. Is there something under that where you could, the mayor could issue something saying that in the interest of public health, that I mean, obviously, we can't do anything about food trucks, but we're not going to allow them other mobile vendors where we don't have, a clear understanding of what kind of transactions they're going to be doing. In the interest of public health, we're not going to allow that during this holiday while the lights are on in downtown. I just don't know whether everybody agrees with that or not. I just feel like then we're going to have hand sanitizer stations and all kinds of other things out there to provide for people if they're eating and drinking down here. I just worry about that.
Mayor and Council, this is probably a great opportunity to take what you've provided and we can do some research on it. Because in the circumstances of like selling the hot chocolate, that's clearly in violation. We would not issue them a business license. They could not do that. And so we can scenario what could happen and what we could do if that's okay, and we'll get back to you. And I'll work with Mr. St. John on that.
The comment?
Yeah, Mayor, just one last comment. I think the city, we need to be very careful on how we're advertising the lights being on, because we could be encouraging, I would encourage the business owners to stay open later, but we have to be careful saying that, because now we're encouraging people to come down during the lighting periods and come and dine, and that could just cause for more than 50 people at one place. I think we have to be very, very careful, but Mr. Bailey, your suggestion is right on the money, and see what you can formulate to help. But I just want us to be careful announcing that we're having lights and you should come and dine, and then we just have tons of people here, and there's a spread, and it becomes a super spreader, and it became our advertising that caused it. So just want to be cautious on that.
Before we move on, I have one other question. And Mr. Burke, I don't know if you're the one who has the answer. For actually not a ceremonial tree lighting, but just turning the lights on, are these on timers or are they on photosynthesis? Does it require somebody to run around and flip 500 switches on? What's the scenario?
Go ahead.
Mayor and council members, just to have the lights come on, they are all on timers. With the exception of the night of Glendale Glitters, we actually do have 14 different locations throughout the downtown that they flip the switches on to make sure they come on simultaneously. But in order just to turn them on, they're all on timers.
Okay, so if the council, and it sounds like everybody pretty much agrees with having them turned on early, Thanksgiving Eve, we could have them on timers. It's not going to take extra staff to turn those lights on. Okay, so I think that might resolve some concerns that we had also. But that would be my preference. If nothing else comes out of this, at least that we have the lights come on Thanksgiving Eve and then remain on each night for the duration. Do you agree with that? You got a consensus on that? Yeah. And then you'll come back with us on those other issues? Okay, very good. Okay. I guess we go to the city manager report.
Mayor, members of the council, I have just one item to report out today. Several weeks ago, I transmitted a letter to Javier Gutierrez, the president and CEO of the Arizona Coyotes, and also to Chuck Stedman, who's the chief operating officer of ASM, which of course manages our Gila River Arena on our behalf. In my letter, I informed both parties that the current lease agreement needs to be addressed. The current arrangement does not work for the city, and based on conversations I've had over the past several months, they appear not to work also for the Coyotes. And so I've asked them to begin moving forward. Now, as a reminder, the way the current agreement is that either party on December 31st has the right to execute a termination provision of the agreement. And if neither party initiates the termination provision, then it automatically adds another year onto the existing term. However, if it only takes one party, if they exercise their right to terminate, then essentially what happens is that in 18 months, the club then no longer is obligated or would be allowed to use the facility, depending on which perspective you come into. So I've asked them to start looking at what it would take to enter into a longer-term agreement between them. And so I've asked them to try to get back to the city by the first part of December to see whether or not they can get at least the substantive elements of an extended agreement put together. In talking with Chuck Stedman recently, they did receive just a kind of an opening framework from the Coyotes. I'm not sure what all is entailed in that. We'll let them go through their really through the negotiating process before we start getting a lot of information. But I will continue to keep the council up to speed. But it would be the hopes and desires that we can kind of move away from the year-to-year nature of the agreement and get into something a longer term, which I think benefits all the parties if it can be achieved. And that's my report.
Thank you, sir. City Attorney's report.
No report, thank you.
Okay, council item special interest. Next is just that. Gives the opportunity to each council member to have the topics that they'd like to have discussed by a council at a future workshop. Mr. Aldama, do you have any? Thank you. Councilmember Clark?
None at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Hugh?
None, Mayor.
Councilmember Tomachuk?
Nothing today, Mayor.
Mr. Turner?
Thank you, Mayor, I do. As we all know, the census process is winding down. It's been extended a little bit, but it will at some point. The census will end and the numbers will be counted, which will then bring on the necessity for governmental jurisdictions all across the country to do a redistricting process. And I think it's time that we start looking at, what redistricting process would look like for us here in Glendale. So if staff could prepare some sort of presentation on the variables, how it's been done perhaps in the past, council may consider whether or not they want to appoint an independent citizens commission to come up with a recommended map or maps, or whether we want to do it entirely ourselves. But that's all open for conversation, I would think, in a future workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Nothing today, Mayor.
Thank you. I have nothing myself. Can I get a motion to go into executive session?
I so move.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to go into executive session. Discussion on a motion. Hearing none. All in favor, vote aye.
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 Any opposed, vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it. We are going to executive session down that way.